There are some really bad countries in the world, places that are not appealing or simply dangerous, places you'd never want to take a vacation to. We used the Human Development Index to determine this list, and it just so happens that every one of these countries is in Africa. Today, we look at the worst places in the world you'll never want to live in. Before we get to the video, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss anything we post. The Human Development Index. WorldPopulationReview.com says the following about the Human Development Index. To determine which countries are developed countries, the Human Development Index, HDI, was developed by the United Nations. The Human Development Index is quantified by looking at a country's human development factors such as life expectancy, per capita income, and education. HDI is scaled from 0 to 1.0, with most developed nations having a 0.8 or above score. The Human Development Index is divided into 4 tiers: low human development, 0 to 0.55, medium human development, 0.55 to 0.70, high human development, 0.7 to 0.8, and very high human development, 0.8 to 1.0. Mali has a Human Development Index of 0.427. More developed countries like Norway have an HDI of 0.953, which is also the highest in the world. Present-day Mali is named after the Mali Empire that was at its peak in the 14th century. The empire covered an area about twice the size of modern-day France and stretched to the west coast of Africa. In the late 19th century, France seized control of Mali and still plays a major role in this country like some other North African countries. Economic activity is largely confined to the Niger River area. About 65% of Mali's land area is desert or semi-desert. 80% of the labor force is engaged in farming and fishing. 10% of the population are nomads. Industrial activity is mostly concentrated on processing farming commodities. In 2017, its GDP growth rate was 5.4%, which was down from the 2016 rate of 5.8%. Since Lake Mali is drying up, future outlooks are rather dim for this country. Diseases in Mali include bacterial and protozoal, diarrhea, hepatitis A, typhoid fever, malaria, dengue fever, schistosomiasis, rabies, and meningococcal meningitis. 18.6% of children under 5 are underweight. Burkina Faso. With a Human Development Index of 0.423 and terrorism, Burkina Faso is one of the worst places to live. The country experienced terrorist attacks in its capital in 2016, 2017, and 2018. More attacks in the country's northern and eastern regions resulted in approximately 4,000 deaths and over 900,000 internally displaced persons from 2019 to 2020. Burkina Faso's high population growth, almost constant drought, continued perennial food insecurity, and limited natural resources result in poor economic prospects for the majority of its citizens. Its external debt is steadily increasing, and in 2004 it had a massive unemployment rate of 77%. Its imports include capital goods, foodstuffs, and petroleum at $5.2 billion annually, while its exports are gold, cotton, and livestock at around $3.9 billion annually. It therefore has an import-export deficit of around $1.3 billion annually. Burkina Faso has a terrorist problem from at least 3 different groups. Sierra Leone. The region around Freetown was used by the British in the late 18th century and early 19th century to resettle freed slaves, London's black poor, and many African-American refugees from the American Revolution. Since 1808, Sierra Leone has been a British Crown colony. The country gained independence in 1961. Today, Sierra Leone is the poorest nation in the Commonwealth. It had a civil war which lasted from 1991 to 2002, which resulted in tens of thousands of deaths and the displacement of more than 2 million people, which in turn accounts for about 1/3 of the entire population. The country seems to be improving, though. The poverty rate in 2016 was 17.2%, but by 2017 had been reduced to 15%. The CIA World Factbook claims Sierra Leone is slowly returning to democracy. Their Human Development Index stands at 0.419. The following diseases are prevalent in Sierra Leone, and the risk factor is very high: bacterial and protozoal, diarrhea, hepatitis A, typhoid fever, malaria, dengue fever, schistosomiasis, rabies, and Lassa fever. Burundi. Burundi lies south of Rwanda, which is becoming one of the more prosperous countries in Africa. Unfortunately, Burundi has a Human Development Index of 0.388, whereas Rwanda's is 0.524. Officially, the Republic of Burundi is a landlocked country in the Great Rift Valley, where the African Great Lakes region and East Africa meet. Except for Rwanda to the north, it's bordered by Tanzania to the east and southeast, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo to the west. Lake Tanganyika lies along its southwestern border. It has 2 capital cities, Gitega and Bujumbura. In 2014, it was estimated that 64.6% of Burundians lived below the poverty line. The country has a revenue of $536.7 million, but has expenditures of $729.6 million as estimated in 2017. Only 11% of the population has access to electricity, but 80.3% of the population has access to drinking water. With water comes other problems such as waterborne diseases like bacterial and protozoal, diarrhea, hepatitis A, and typhoid fever. The prevalence of these diseases together with malaria is high. There's one doctor for every 10,000 people. Chad. Chad is bordered by Libya to the south, Sudan to the east, the Central African Republic to the south, Cameroon to the southwest, Nigeria to the southwest, and Niger to the west. It still has a notable French military presence within its borders. It has a Human Development Index of 0.404. It's officially known as the Republic of Chad and is a landlocked country. It was founded on 11th of August 1960 and has a population of 15.95 million as of 2019. Its GDP stands at $11.31 billion as recorded in 2019, and as one of the largest countries in Africa, it covers an area of 1.284 million kilometers squared. The country has sporadic problems with rebellions in its northern region, and towards the end of 2015, the government had imposed a state of emergency in the Lake Chad region following multiple attacks by the terrorist group Boko Haram. Boko Haram also launched several bombings in N'Djamena in mid-2015. Its terrain makes everything a bit harder as well, with broad, arid plains in its center, a desert to the north, mountains in the northwest, and some lowlands in the south. Other issues include inadequate supplies of potable water and improper waste disposal in rural areas. Poor farming practices contribute to soil and water pollution and desertification. In 2011, it was estimated that 46.7% of the population live below the poverty line. South Sudan. With a Human Development Index of 0.388 and constant conflict, South Sudan is one of the worst places to live in the world. It's one of the youngest countries and is in constant conflict with Sudan over its oil riches. Other resources include hydropower, fertile agricultural land, gold, diamonds, petroleum, hardwoods, limestone, iron ore, copper, chromium ore, zinc, tungsten, mica, and silver. Ineffective governance and the inability to control opposition forces operating in its territory has made things extremely difficult for South Sudan since its independence on July 9, 2011. Since January 2012, economic conditions have deteriorated from when the government decided to shut down oil production following disagreements with Sudan. Conflict broke out between the South Sudanese government and opposition groups. Tens of thousands of South Sudanese citizens were plunged into a dire humanitarian crisis with food shortages as the order of the day. The warring parties signed a peace agreement in August 2015. This created a transitional government of national unity by April 2016. However, in July 2016, fighting broke out in the capital Juba between the two principal signatories, plunging the country back into conflict. A revitalized peace agreement was signed in September 2018, ending the fighting. Under the agreement, the government and various rebel groups agreed that the sides would form a unified national army and create a transitional government by May 2019. The agreement was then extended to November 2019 and again until February 2020. Failure to agree on the country's internal political boundaries has stalled its implementation. South Sudan still offers no security for its citizens. Central African Republic. This is a country where in 2013, the then General Francois Bozize, who was the president, would drive around handing out the local currency to people he wanted to impress, thereby simply devaluing the currency further. The backbone of the economy of the Central African Republic, CAR, lies in subsistence farming, forestry, and mining. About 60% of the population live in outlying areas. It's estimated the agricultural sector generates more than half of estimated GDP, although statistics are unreliable in the conflict-prone country. Farming produces cassava, yams, ground nuts, taro, bananas, sugarcane, beef, maize, plantains, and milk. Timber, diamonds, and cotton account for most export earnings. Constraints to economic development include the CAR's landlocked geography, poor transportation system, largely unskilled workforce, and a history of misdirected macroeconomic policies. Economic revitalization is hampered by factional fighting between the government and its opponents. Distribution of income is decidedly unequal, and grants from the international community only partially meets the country's humanitarian needs. The Human Development Index stands at 0.367 in the Central African Republic. Niger. Political infighting brought the government of Niger to a standstill, and in 1996 there was a coup orchestrated by Colonel Ibrahim Bar. Bar was killed in a counter-coup in 1999. Mamadou Tanja then became president. He then changed the laws, allowing him to remain president for longer. Military officers led a coup that deposed Tanja and suspended the constitution. Issoufou Mahamadou was then elected in April 2011 following the coup and re-elected to a second term in early 2016. Today, Niger is one of the poorest countries in the world, with almost non-existent government services and insufficient funds to develop its its resources and is ranked last in the world on the United Nations Development Programme's Human Development Index. Its rating is 0.354. The largely agricultural-based economy is frequently disrupted by extended droughts. Droughts are common to the Sahel region of Africa. A Tuareg rebellion originated in 2007 but ended in 2009. Niger is facing increased security concerns at its borders from various external threats, including insecurity in Libya and violent extremism in northeastern Nigeria. It must be mentioned that countries like Venezuela are also not good places to live in today, but their situation is more recent. The countries mentioned in this list have been struggling for many decades. There are various factors, but arguably it boils down to political will and the disenfranchisement and exploitation of many African people by their own governments and especially by richer countries. I hope you found today's video insightful. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.